Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining. All of our guests, thanks for coming and joining us this evening. I'm Kim Smee and I'm the editor of the Manly Observer. For those who don't know, I launched Manly Observer about a year ago to address a clear issue I think the local area had with inaccessible and at times absent local news. It was meant to be a side project, but with up to 500,000 monthly views from local readers, it's quickly become clear that our community is hungry for connection and also for free, frank and fair communication about important issues and local news and happening, and a bit of a silly sense of humour too. While I'm not the organiser or connected in any way to the organisers of this event, it is in this spirit of providing unbiased access to quality information that brings us all here together tonight. It's great to see so many of you here, although I don't actually know how many there are, but I'm going to guess quite a few, and quite a number of you on the live stream now as well. And I think it's really important that we do take the time to understand what it is that our local representatives or our representatives to be believe in, so that we spend our vote wisely. So I'm looking forward to letting you get to know the people that we will be voting for. We're focusing on two questions that most of you would understand. The premise of tonight is about the environment. It is an environmental focus. And we're going to ask generally about the environment and also about how they intend to fund their plans for the environment in the local area. In case you don't know, the Northern Beaches is made up of 5 different voting segments called wards. There's Pittwater, Narrabeen, French's Forest, and the 2 sexiest wards, Curl and Manly. And tonight we are only dealing with the peak sexy ward of Manly. So we're going to meet the candidates for Manly. There are actually quite a few candidates. I think there's 3 for each group, but we are meeting the lead candidate for each of those. And we've given them a chance to pre-record 2 of their answers. That's because we want smart, considered responses. We want to actually hear. We don't want to hear any filler. We want to hear what their beliefs are and what their position is on environmental matters. Now we have pretty much everybody, except for, unfortunately, the Liberal candidate for Manly, Georgia Ryburn. She hasn't been able to attend tonight because she just had a baby, which is a pretty decent excuse. She says she cares deeply about the Northern Beaches, our environment and our communities, but she won't be available tonight. Now, politics can be a little boring. It can be a bit dry and it can be a bit confusing. But it's never been more important than now to understand what our elected officials are passionate about and what they're willing to show us in action. It's great for someone to fix the footpaths and pick up the bins and hopefully recycle things in those bins. But what else can we do if we set our mind to it and empower our leaders to act? Now I know that our current council is already doing quite a few things. I think it was yesterday or the day before they actually won an award for switching to renewables. But there's more that can be done, and we have to keep that pressure going. So let's meet the people who want to represent us. Our first candidate tonight is Candy Bingham. Candy is currently the Deputy Mayor. She's been a councillor for 8 years, and she's standing again under the Good for Manly banner for the Manly ward. So Candy, the question is, in 30 seconds or less, can you tell me what is important to you environmentally?
It's really simple. Hi, everybody. We have to show leadership. And I think one of the things that's exciting me is that the council is actually doing that. There's no reason why we can't smash the zero emissions by 2030. And I'm looking forward to hearing some ideas tonight on how we keep doing that. We're absolutely on track. It's doable. Let's make it happen.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Councillor Sarah Gratton.
Thanks very much, Kim. So for me, what's so important is we just live in this place of unbelievable natural beauty. And it is I think everybody loves to live here because whether it's the beautiful, it's the water, it's the bushland, it's the coast, it's the harbour, and we need to protect that for ourselves now, but also for our future generations. And so everything that we're doing on council and what we want to keep doing is really to be able to keep that protection going, reducing pollution, reducing emissions, and looking after our biodiversity, whether it's our little penguins or the echidna that walks down through Burnt Bridge Creek deviation, you know, the wallabies that show up now and again. You know, we really need to look after it, and that's what I'm so passionate about.
Thanks, Sarah. And I should have added your many accolades. You're currently a Northern Beaches councillor. Also, it says CEO, but I'm pretty sure that you're the COO.
That's correct.
The coup of UNICEF Australia, no less. And you live in Balgowlah Heights, and you've just survived being an HSC mum. Still going. 3 down, 4 to go. Yeah, I've blocked it out because I have the luxury of being able to do it. And I also know that you've been a strong leader in the traffic and transport issues and on all those fun committees. Okay, up next, John Kelly. John is standing under the Manly First Independence banner, which he says is the only truly independent candidates for the Manly ward. John is the Executive Director of the Community for Community Northern Beaches, which is an excellent local organisation, and has extensively volunteered in the area. John, what's important environmentally to you?
If I was to say it in a word, it would be education. I think there's so much misinformation out there at the moment about so many different issues that puts people off. I think if council can educate people around environmental issues, and there are so many different environmental issues, I think that will achieve real change. I've always found with my charity work that if people are given a proper education, it can change their lives. So I think educating people through workshops, working with schools, having sustainability, environmental expos, these sorts of things, exposing people to the new technology, new ideas, why we need to change, for me is the most important thing to actually achieve change.
Thanks, John. Sam Pygram is next. Sam Pygram is a Labor candidate and lives in Manly with his wife and 2 sons. He's a chemical engineer and an active member of the surf lifesaving community. Sam, what's important to you environmentally?
Just a point of correction, actually, it's Brant, the Curl Labor candidate. It's an active member of the surf lifesaving community.
I did myself. That, but
yeah.
I didn't write it, okay?
Yeah.
Well, Sam, would you like to quickly correct that and what you are an active member in?
Well, actually, obviously Labor and Labor's Environmental Action Network. So yeah, what's important to me environmentally is obviously climate change as it should be for everyone. That's the whole reason I'm sitting here. I'm a relatively recent addition to the Labor Party. Just got tired of the lack of action from the federal government, hence why I joined Labor. But associated with climate change is habitat loss. Since John Howard started the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, we've lost more than the equivalent of Tasmania in terms of forest land. That's a lot in just over 20 years. So on a local level, I would like to see mass plantings undertaken, so we really increase our urban tree canopy and nature corridors.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. At least we didn't say you're from the Liberal Party as we initially did when you first came on, so it's one step in the right direction for you. And next I'd like to point to Pamela Dawes, and she's from the Greens. Pam is a long-term resident of the Northern Beaches. She's a medical photographer with lifelong career in photography and television. She's also a bush regenerator, a hands-on environmentalist, actively campaigning for Climate Council, Australian Conservation Council, Wilderness Society, Stop Adani, Greenpeace, and Climate Justice Australia. I'm sorry you only have 30 seconds on this one then, Pam, but what is most important to you environmentally?
Most important to me is the biodiversity of our area. The survival of many species, not just threatened species, depend on our reduction of greenhouse gases as soon as possible. We need to protect these species from development, degradation, waste and pollution. We have the most biodiverse area, or one of the most, in Sydney, and we have a critical responsibility to preserve those species. The council has in their planning proposals, they have a plan to avoid, minimise and offset, but I'd like to have stronger rules on the offset and to have offset in our area like for like.
Thanks, Pam. Okay, so we're going to move on now. As I mentioned, there was a pre-recorded section, so we're going to move on to that, where we will actually just roll through what each of the candidates have put together. Now, as you're watching it, you might have questions that spring to mind. There is a Q&A function, so just put those questions in there. We'll get to as many as we can at the end, but we're also going to do our best to make sure that you have access to the candidates and their various links and information in case you want to have those questions answered at a later time. They're generally pretty accessible, but they'll never be more accessible than in the next few weeks if you have some more questions. So at the end of the evening, we'll have a chance to ask those candidates to clarify any of those details that you're looking for before you commit to your vote. I would also like to remind you that on manlyobserver.com.au, I have created a Meet the Candidates page, which does have all the lead candidates for the Manly and Kelko ward, and they all, that will have the links to all of their pages. All right, let's move to question 1. We know that Council has declared a climate emergency. The question is, within the confines of your powers as a future councillor and within council jurisdiction, what would you do to accelerate carbon neutrality within your term, so by 2025, if you were to become councillor? Kicking it off first will be Councillor Candy Bingham.
I'm passionate about climate change, and I think, like all of us watching tonight, it is just so vital that we continue to do major steps to do everything that we can to reduce our emissions. Council is really leading the way, and I'm very proud of what's been done so far. They're aspiring to net zero by 2030. Let's just get on with it and get it done. Things like the rollout of an electric fleet. Already we have a trial of electric vehicles on council. Progressively, the whole fleet should be electric. A lot of the roofs on council dwellings now have solar panels. This is making a huge difference. And I bet you didn't know that the LED lights in all the streets now have been changed. So that is amazing, and it's having a huge impact on our electricity bill for a start. And also, all electricity that is used by the council is renewable energy. So we need to keep building on these initiatives and, of course, lead the way. Council has done a lot already in encouraging others to take up solar panels on our roofs. I don't see it as our job to pay for other people's solar panels. There are plenty of other government funds that do that. But an educational role is very important. It's confusing, it's complex. So the council's already doing a lot in this area, where you can go to the website and see who are the recommended people who do this job well in our area. So lots to be done. It has my full support, and as a councillor I will do everything that I can to make sure that we are zero neutral as quickly as possible.
Hi, I'm Councillor Gratton of the Your Northern Beaches independent team. As a council, we've actually done a lot over the last 4 years in relation to environment and climate change. We've passed the Environment and Climate Change Strategy, we've done the Climate Change Action Plan, and we declared a climate emergency back in 2019. So in terms of the measures that have been put in place, Council has already reduced their emissions by 80%, largely through the renewable energy contract, with 100% renewable energy now for Northern Beaches Council. We've also implemented solar panels on many council buildings, and we have the largest solar panel installation at the Manly Boy Charlton Pool. We've also had a community battery trial that has gone ahead up in Belrose. We have transitioned the acquisition of council fleet to electric vehicles and have put in place some electric vehicle charging stations in council properties, included it in some developments, and also we are looking at rolling that out in the public, and there's a recent smart parking zones that have been put in place. So the climate change strategy has indicated that we will have an aspirational target of net zero by 2030, and we're well on track to achieve that. We've also looking at how can we encourage a reduction in climate emissions more broadly across the community. And so the way that I would go about that is really looking at what are those key buckets, those key sources of emissions. So the largest one is energy, electricity, which is 56% of the total carbon emissions on the northern beaches. So clearly reducing the demand for energy and increasing solar panel uptake and renewable energy uptake. The use of community batteries, continuing, strategies. We also look at the new LEP that is coming up and what are the building standards and so forth that are going to be included in those. We can up the sustainability requirements through the basic standards so that we can have more energy efficient buildings. Transport is the second largest cause of emissions on the northern beaches at 29%. And so moving, and I continue to encourage the active transport and public use of public transport as a way to get cars off the road. And in fact, the Transport's Move strategy that was passed, a couple of years ago now, has got a target in there of reducing cars on the road by 30% across the northern beaches. Methane is another area, and gas, another area source of emission, much smaller source of the overall mix, but something that has a really strong impact on global warming, as we know, 23 times the amount of carbon. So low-hanging fruit. So what can we do there to reduce methane emissions? So, meat-free Mondays or something like that, but we can continue looking at that. But also waste and compost, and moving to taking food scraps and things out of the waste stream and putting them into compost is a really effective way of trying to reduce those emissions. And also we're still working with the council staff on other waste strategies to actually reduce our overall waste but also to increase the recycled content of those waste streams. So there are a couple of the areas. I've gone over time, so I'm going to have to edit this video. See ya.
Hi, I'm John Kelly. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. It's interesting that carbon was the number one concern for people when they were asked about the environment. Several months ago, Manly First, your independents for Manly, introduced a strategy called Solar Sense. Solar Sense is directly aimed at reducing our carbon footprint. What Solar Sense essentially is a scheme where council pays the upfront cost of solar installation on homes and residential flat buildings. That initial cost is then repaid interest-free by the homeowner back to council over a 10-year period. In this way, the homeowner is not discouraged from putting solar on their roof by a payback period that could be 5 to 7 years before they start to see savings on that investment. This is one way of really encouraging people to say, hey, we can afford solar now. We really want solar because we can see the benefits it has to the environment, so let's go ahead and do it. For council's part, there is one other council in the whole of Australia that actually have a scheme like this. It's a council that's about a third of the size of Northern Beaches, and yet they're able to install solar on 450 to 500 homes each year. That's a huge, huge plus for the environment and for reducing our carbon footprint. Council will do the initial legwork, and council already have a solar power, a solar energy assistance to its ratepayers. So this is just a matter of really supercharging what's already there. using council's ability to be able to put out for tenders to reputable solar installers that meet all the necessary certifications, and particularly the environmental certifications of those systems, and then being able to manage that system on behalf of the residents that will apply. The other good thing about this is that although council is putting up that upfront cost, it is GST free, and if we also put state government and federal government subsidies on top, the ratepayer, the homeowner, is able to get a really good system at a really good price, which again is an encouragement for them to get that. Council's part, yes, they're paying an upfront cost, but that cost is refunded to council each quarter. And what happens is that pool of money is continually topped up. In that way, it's very much like a no-interest loan scheme or a microfinancing scheme, in that the money is continually circulating and coming back. And that's the beauty of this particular scheme, as well as the significant environmental benefits that it is going to have. So that's Solar Sense, and hopefully that's a policy that addresses the carbon issue and is something that council can do on an everyday level without referring back to state or federal government policies to drive climate change in this country. Thank you.
How would I accelerate the council to carbon neutrality? Well, the council's already done the easiest part, which is signing up for renewable energy. That's cut approximately 82% of their emissions and also saved them a fair bit of money. So that leaves two other areas, which is approximately 12% for fleet vehicles and 6% for gas. So fleet vehicles have naturally about a turnover of every 3 years. So I would implement a strategy that when a vehicle is to be disposed, they replace it with an electric vehicle. So I think it's quite an easy thing to implement and achieve. The gas side of things is a bit more difficult. Without knowing what gas infrastructure council has in place, it's hard for me to say definitively what we should be doing, but in broad terms, what can be replaced now and be electrified should be, and what can't be, they have plans to do so in the future, but also council can look at abatement programs to offset the carbon emissions from the gas infrastructure in the meantime. And that would get council to carbon neutrality within this next council term, I believe. Aside from that, what can council do for the community to help the community to reduce emissions? Well, I think there's a number of areas. So I've got some notes here, so just bear with me. So first off, FOGO, or food and garden organic material, accounts for about 40% of landfill waste. So I think council should be implementing a strategy where, or perhaps a trial, where they do FOGO collection in high density dwellings, and if proven successful, then they can expand that into other areas to the rest of the community. I will be looking at changing development standards that mandates rooftop solar and the banning of gas appliances for all new residential dwellings. This is something a Labor-led council has done in Canterbury Bankstown, so it's definitely feasible. I will also advocate for increasing the urban tree canopy and nature corridors, and this can be achieved in a number of different ways. First off, I'll be increasing council's tube stop program so that we have enough plants to plant locally. I will be identifying areas to plant out and involve the community and third-party organisations to do the plantings, and I'll talk more about that later on the next question, when I answer the next question. And then I will change, it's a simple, small change, but I'll change the regulations where currently people have to apply to council and pay $220 in order to plant out their nature strips in front of their homes. So I'll remove that and allow them to plant endemic native plants. I would like to see the building of rain gardens that filter out small micro and chemical pollutants in stormwater and also provide urban heat relief. And then lastly, it'd be developing a policy to support more green roofs in the area. So those are the things I'll be doing with council if elected to council. Thanks.
Hello. As your Manly Greens councillor, I would strongly support the full installation of underwater Sydney seaweed called crayweed right across the northern beaches. This seaweed develops into underwater forests, absorbing carbon and nitrogen and producing oxygen, whilst providing fish habitat and a fascinating marine environment. It has been successfully trialled in Manly and Bondi over the last 5 years, with new colonies reproducing within the area. Council must act to prevent and deter people from poisoning mature native trees to get a better water view, which is a blatant act of environmental vandalism and is occurring all over the northern beaches. Other councils have acted by putting up appropriate signs and scaffolding around the poisoned trees to block those views and deter people from this vile act. Aside from being a carbon sink, mature street trees provide refuge and building grounds for thousands of native wildlife, including echidnas, lizards, snakes, possums, gliders and birds, plus endangered microbats and powerful owls. The Northern Beaches Climate Action Plan needs to be accelerated and prioritised with particular attention to bike safety. An audit of interconnecting cycle routes and pedestrian paths is a must to give commuters confidence in the viability of using cycles as an alternative means of everyday transport instead of cars. Quick attention to the issues which come from the audit is paramount. More than 70% of our emissions come from using energy, so by using renewable energy to propagate electric charging stations, we are well on our way to net zero. The use of household solar power to charge private vehicles should also be encouraged. Location of new developments which are close to interconnecting public transport would greatly lessen reliance on cars. A bus replaces up to 40 individual cars and the congestion and carbon emissions that cars create. Retaining an expansion of council-operated bus services, such as the hop, skip and jump buses, will be required due to the future disappearance of less frequented bus routes, already indicated by the new private operators of Sydney buses. Any expansion should use electric vehicles. Prioritising environmentally friendly designs of domestic and commercial buildings which incorporate solar panels, vertical gardens, correct solar orientation, window shades and rainwater retention and reuse. Community gardens could be set up to bring a social setting to growing your own food and learning about native plants. The Council have had native plant giveaway projects which were well received and should be expanded to increase interest in our local plant diversity. There are so many ways that Greens councillors can introduce to reduce carbon and bring about a better future for the Northern Beaches residents and wildlife. Vote 1, Group F, Greens for the Future of Manly.
Okay, I think that's everybody done. I think that were some really intelligent answers there. I know for me personally, I try and be a little less shit every day, you know, whether it's actually downloading that Green Canteen caffeine, I think it's called, app and making sure that I replace my cup, or you know, yesterday I finally went to that red cycle at Coles and got rid of those bags. You know, the things that we do in our own homes will add up, and we need to be a little bit better every day. And it's great to see, and it's important to see our representatives at a minimum having that same attitude, and obviously, if possible, to go well beyond. It's amazing when we think about, like, when I grew up in the 80s and also in the 90s, the things that we didn't do, rather, you know, with our recycling, or even, you know, everyone threw kind of cigarette butts on the floor, and you know, we look back to that and just think that's wild, that's crazy. And I feel like in the next 10, 20 years, we're going to look back at how we're living now and be a little bit embarrassed as well. So we really do need people to lead the way, because we face an existential threat from climate change and ecological collapse, and our very survival does depend on our response to those problems in the next couple of years. many of the changes are decided on a state or a federal level. And so it's hard sometimes when we get to the local government side of things. Well, they've got to focus on the rates and rubbish and all that kind of stuff. But how we act on a local level will filter up and does make a difference. And nobody's going to care more about what's happening, with the seagrass in Cabbage Tree Bay or whether there's water trickling in Burnt Bridge Creek more than your local community. Nobody in those really high levels is going to care quite as much as us. So, but we tend to worry about the cost of acting, but not so much the cost of failing to act. The cost of not acting on climate change and these environmental issues will be detrimental to the quality of our lives. And the science tells us that the impacts threaten our biodiversity, safety, food supply, most worrying for me. And it's critical that we fund mitigating actions right now. But the key word is fund. It costs money. So this was reflected in the community's second most asked question. So the question is, where would you recommend council draws the money from to fund your recommended environmental projects?
I think it's quite simple how we pay for this. A good example is the Boyd Charlton Pool, the Manly Swim Centre. It represented 13% of council's electricity bill. So recently we've spent $450,000 putting solar panels on the roof. And of course, that is already paying for itself in leaps and bounds. One of the great things about renewable energy is that it does provide savings. It does start to pay for itself. So I would encourage council to set aside the money that we're saving to reinvest in other initiatives in relation to net emissions.
So where would we actually get the money for doing the environmental projects? Actually, council at the moment are having a cash flow crunch. We've just incurred $46 million in losses over the last 2 years from the COVID shutdowns. Our unrestricted cash reserves are now down to less than $15 million. So what council can do is actually play a really important role as an education hub and setting processes and standards in order to drive and incentivise the improved environmental activity, improving environmental outcomes and reducing carbon emissions. For example, we're doing a lot of work at the moment on the local environment plan so that we can set new standards for buildings, and through consultation with the community, we can deliver better environmental outcomes by ensuring building requirements will reduce energy usage. Secondly, we have a lot of assets in relation to parking spaces and other on-road assets. We know transport is the second biggest source of emissions. So we can use these assets wisely, potentially incentivising electric vehicles by providing car spaces, say, for electric vehicles, and rolling out the sort of infrastructure for which we get grants for, which is another way that's a low cash drain on the council, but can really help reduce what amounts to almost 30% of total emissions on the beaches. Thirdly, we can look at our procurement and supplier processes when we do tenders and other sorts of procurement. We do not have any environmental and sustainability criteria in our selection process at this point. We recently started talking about that, and I would plan to build that in should I be re-elected. I'd build in a process so that we're actually incentivising the sort of activity to encourage sustainability as a key feature when we're out procuring services throughout the supply chain. Finally, we've got a number of environmental grants at the moment that we provide to community organisations, and should the cash flow situation improve, I think that's a really good way of supporting the fantastic environmental community groups. If we can provide a little bit of funding to assist these groups, they have an enormous impact on the entire network. Great innovations are coming from these passionate people, and I would continue to encourage that ripple effect of behaviour change. It doesn't have to cost a lot, and in some cases, like renewable energy, council has already saved $1.7 million over the next 7 years. I'll be looking for low-cost innovations, and I will ensure council continues to provide a leadership role that demonstrates our commitment to provide and activate the whole community on our road to net zero. More electric vehicles, increased recycling from the waste streams, more collaboration with community groups, and providing a hub of information, connecting people together so that we can all achieve more as fast as possible on our road to net zero.
In terms of paying for solar sets, I think there's a number of options that Council has for itself. If Council, for example, was able to set aside 1% of its $450 million budget, that would be $4.5 million. Now, even if a solar system costs $10,000 per solar system, there's the potential straight away for 450 solar units on houses. And of course, as I mentioned earlier in my other response, because that money is constantly coming back into Council's solar sense pool, other people are able to draw from it. But there's other funding options as well that Council has. There are state and federal grants that it could apply for. There's the ability to target foundations and philanthropics that are environmentally conscious and are looking at reducing our carbon footprint. And there's a novel way as well that the community can get involved and think, hey, by pitching in and having a good time, we can also produce funds for increasing the amount of solar that's put on roofs. And that's Council running sustainability fairs or fun fairs or community events with a sustainability slant to them, where people can come along and they can enjoy themselves, they can spend money, Council can generate some income, and people know that that money that's been generated can go back into that solar sense pool to support more people getting solar. So the initial seed money is something that the Council have to address in terms of their environmental credentials. Do they want to go ahead with this? I think something like 1% of their total revenue for the year is not something that's too hard to accept for people. And so that is the initial seed money, which will continually be topped up through the way that the Solar Sense program operates and through Council's ability to continue to get other funding coming in and increasing that pool. Thank you.
So how would I pay for my carbon neutrality policies? Well, first off, I think it's only fair that the money saved by Council when they switch to renewable energy is put towards other carbon neutral projects. Secondly, a number of my ideas are simply changes to regulations at no cost to the Council. Thirdly, the increased plantings, so the development of more urban tree canopies and nature corridors. Well, there's third-party organisations out there like Greenfleet, and they provide materials, tube stocks and labour for free as long as we have enough land for them to plant out. So we would need to determine if we do meet their requirements, and increasing Council's current tube stock program as well. I don't anticipate that costing much money. Changing to electric vehicles, again, we're swapping out one item for another. Sure, electric vehicles have a premium, but over the lifetime, electric vehicles are cheaper than internal combustion engine vehicles, so I would suggest that Council keeps an electric vehicle fleet longer than they would for an ICE vehicle. And then with regards to the food and garden organic program, the trial, and then expansion, well, I could see that an expansion could cost a fair bit of money. So there's a couple of areas we would look at. Firstly, hopefully the state and federal governments, hopefully by then the Labor federal government will be having incentives. Because, for example, the New South Wales government wants to be carbon neutral for organic waste to landfill by 2030. So hopefully they'll provide some incentives by that time. Other than that, since amalgamation, Council's staff costs, particularly management costs, have increased a lot. When you look at it as a total cost compared to revenue, percentage-wise, it's gone up a lot. So if elected to Council, that would be one area that I would be looking at saving, whether that's immediate adjustments to staffing numbers, etc., or just through attrition, that would have to be looked at. But that is one area that I'll be looking at to save us money. So I don't think the council really needs to spend a lot of money to get to carbon neutrality for their direct emissions. But when we're looking at the community as a whole, yes, there will be costs involved. And I do believe, because council's finances are in good shape, we do have the scope to be able to implement these programs and be still financially sound. Thank you.
Many of the ideas I propose, whilst they are foundational to local wards and populations, are, in the majority, funded by state and federal governments due to their universal nature and appeal. Said grants will be sought to assist with this program. The planting of crayweed needs to be accelerated so its natural reproduction can start to grow into new underwater forests. Council currently have a $473 million budget and has money to assist with climate and environment-related policy measures. Activities which improve the health, carbon absorption and extraordinary biodiversity of the Northern Beaches, such as the crayweed installations, increase revenue by attracting snorkelers, swimmers and fishermen, which further supports tourism and hospitality businesses along the Northern Beaches, offsetting any council sums invested. It is also worth recognising that money spent by council to future-proof climate change impacts will play a significant role in avoiding greater costs to council in the future. A very strong argument exists that money spent on the environment leads directly to better returns for local businesses, let alone the environment itself. That is why the Greens will propose that the council takes a far more significant role in environmental matters by encouraging the community and developers to change their thinking and design for a better, more carbon-reducing future. Vote 1, Greens, for Group F for the future of Manly. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pam. All right, so I think that's everybody has said their piece, and we're going to move on now. I think there were, 5 very different proposals and unique approaches to funding. I'd like to know, does anyone have any burning questions? Did anything resonate? Was anybody confused by anything in particular? We are now going to move to the question answer section. We've got a few questions that I'm really interested in getting answers to in the chat here. If all the candidates could put their, I don't feel so alone in here. That's great, thanks. Now we also got quite a few questions before tonight as well. So we'll try and limit your answer to a minute. I think we're going pretty well timing wise. So if everybody wants to answer, you can, but you don't have to if it's not your thing. Now, several people wrote to ask what each of the candidates, this is emailed in from Melissa, what can Manly do to support a circular economy? Recycling. Would anybody like to go first? Just put your hand up. Like school. Nobody wants to go first. Well, I'm going to single you out then, Sam, because you went last and all the others, and also because you were actually already talking in one of your proposals, you were talking about some of the Labor-led councils that had, sorry, I forget you, I should be looking at the screen, the Labor-led councils that had introduced some recycling and particularly with organic waste. I'd like to hear more about that.
The Labor Council in Canterbury Bankstown implemented or mandated that all new residential buildings have rooftop solar, and they weren't allowed to install gas appliances. In terms of FOGO, food and organic garden waste, that I believe the City of Sydney has started something there. I could be wrong. Yeah, as I said, approximately 40% of all landfill waste is from food and organic garden waste, and yeah, there's a lot that can be done. New South Wales government is aiming to be carbon neutral with regards to that waste by 2030. But in terms, if I move back to the question around circular economy, how can the council help? Look, it's not something I've actually spent much time considering. I've considered lots of aspects around what the council can do for FOGO, and
Be an expert in every field. It's okay.
Yeah,
Last thing I think anybody wants is a politician that goes into a position thinking they know everything beforehand.
that is not myself, and I always like to answer when I've been able to consider things properly. But I think look, the council, I think Sarah actually mentioned one of the strengths of the council is they're always in a position to educate, communicate with the community, and that would be probably the start of moving towards a circular economy. But in terms of subsidising or implementing themselves, again, I'm not in a position to state exactly how strong the council are financially to implement such a large program.
Yeah.
So I can't answer more than that.
Thank you. I know for me, I've just bought one of those wick worming things. It's a local guy in Fairlight who created these boxes, and it's because I'm sick of putting all my scraps, not that I leave much on my plate, in with the garbage. So I'm gonna, apparently there's the Manly Worm Lady, and I'm gonna learn about that. But I would personally love to get as much guidance and help from the council. I'm sure there's probably incentives. Now I saw Candy had her hand up next, and then I'll go to Councillor Gratton. Sorry, Sarah, Candy, councillors, I don't know.
Okay. Thanks, Kim. Look, one of the things that I've been exploring is how can we provide a central compound for the restaurants, particularly in Manly Corso, so that we can collect their food and that gets recycled. It's been done very effectively in Melbourne, particularly with their laneways. And if you consider it, Worcester Street car park is a perfect place for a central compound, and we could start a program with those restaurants and cafes in that immediate area. And I think there'd be a lot of support for that. Good on you with your worm farm. One of the things that we did early in the term, and I think we should reintroduce, was council did set aside some money to provide either a free worm farm or a composting bin, and the take up of that was huge. And I think we should look at that again, because they're the sorts of initiatives that at the grassroots level, if you get people involved, they love it, and then that spreads the word and they get more and more involved and want to know what else they can do. So there's a couple of things that I thought of immediately.
Sarah.
Thanks, Kim, and sort of building on some of Can. No,
that was me. Sorry.
Oh, it's all right. You can hear me now. So one of the things that I'm building on some of Candy's ideas is actually thinking about the bulky goods and some of the big things that go into landfill. And I think we might need to get a bit more old school. In the olden days, nothing was ever sort of thrown away. You always took it back, you rebuilt it, you repaired it, you reused it again. And so if we can think about having a reuse centre, for example, where rather than everything going into landfill, we can bring it back to a central point where we can repair it, and give these products a new life. And there are private organisations that are doing some of these things as well, so it doesn't necessarily have to be council money, but we can provide space up at Kimbrickie and what have you to set up one of these centres so that we're not just filling up landfill. And I guess another thing that might be of interest to the community is in relation to construction materials and building materials. So what happens at Kimbrickie up there at the moment, that recycles come up there and they are cleaned up and given a new life, and other construction people, builders and so forth can come and use some of these goods, purchase them, get refurbished goods and go and use them into new constructions and new buildings, so that we're beginning to reuse those materials. So I think that's the sort of thing that would really help with this circular economy.
Yes, John, thanks.
Yeah, look, I used to run St. Vincent de Paul, and of all the donations we get in this particular area, we get 100 tonnes a month, and only 7% of that was actually usable to resell in shops. We've gotten into a culture where we're getting a lot of stuff from places like China. It's very cheap, it's fairly shoddy, it doesn't last. What we've got to do is get back to my earlier answer with the environment. We've got to educate people to change their habits, to understand that just because we're paying half the price for a shirt that might be made in China, really after 12 months, it's useless. So it's that education thing. The other thing is, things like, supporting men's sheds. And there's a great volunteer program up in Cherry Hills where guys repair old toys, and then they're able to give those toys back to other kids, particularly kids. I know I work in that area with a lot of marginalised people, and that's a great way where we can provide Christmas presents back to those kids. It's recycled toys that have been repaired, etc. It's a toy repair workshop. So again, it's supporting those sorts of groups, the men's sheds, the toy repair workshops. Council can do that by advertising them more on their websites, making people aware that they exist, educating people around their clothing choices, etc., and the fact that it's really not good for the environment because it just becomes waste.
Thanks, John. And I'm often amazed at if you dig in, far enough, you'll find that council probably already has an initiative, covering something, but sometimes there are so many moving parts. The communication is as you say, and the education that these things exist is the hard part, which is one thing that Manly Observer is trying to try and tackle. And I understand that they actually created a circular economy map using Google Maps, and now I put a story up on Manly Observer. You can actually use this map to search for, if you want to recycle sports equipment, it'll show you all the places that accept those donations. So there are some tools being developed. It's just whether we're also busy, sometimes we forget to pay attention to what's already there. Pam, did you want to add anything to that?
Just in relation to what John was saying about the men's sheds and recycling, that can also come towards educating people in how to build things, how to repair things. So it can almost be like a mini tech, in that people will go along and learn how to do stuff that they otherwise would have to get a repairman to come and do. So there can be a win-win situation. And also in reference to how to teach people not to just buy the cheapest thing in relation to clothing, particularly. Most of that clothing is of course synthetic, and the synthetics get into the waterways. When every time you wash synthetic clothing, the microplastics go into the waterways. So it's just something that we don't really think about, or I try not to wear anything that's natural fibers. So yeah, it's just a new way of thinking, or probably an old way of thinking. Getting back to the grassroots. Thanks.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. It is the old way of thinking. I remember I used to poke fun of my grandmother for saving all the Christmas wrapping or the cloth, or I mean, she is from a kind of the Depression era, and she had a very different way of doing things, which it just seemed ridiculous, which now makes perfect sense. And those net bags and everything, it's we do actually back. Yeah, that's right. Now the second question, at first I was wondering whether to actually highlight it, because it's but we've got a lot of emails about councillors' positions on the proposed Beaches Link tunnel. The reason why I wondered whether it was worth raising is because it is a state project, and I know that the council has already put its submission in, and the real influence on something that's considered state significant, I understand, is relatively low. But I think people would like to know what each councillor's position is, and what muscle you might put behind, and what strategies might behind mitigating any concerns, whether or not you're for or against it. If you're aware of some of the community's concerns, particularly around the Seaforth and Balgowlah areas. And Sarah's the first to jump in there. Pam, I see that you'd like to go next. I'll just over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Kim. So this is an issue that's been around for quite a while, and I've worked quite closely, living up this end of the Manly ward, worked quite closely with the residents on that tunnel. Yes, it's a state government project. And the approach that I've been taking on this project is that if I say no tunnel, the government won't listen to me. So what instead that I do is I'm working with the government to try to shift some of the ideas and mitigate some of the impacts. So when first started on council, the support of the council was basically support the tunnel. What I've managed to do is make that a big subject to, and it is now subject to the impact on the environment, on the local community, and on the heritage. And we recently, put in the big submission to the EIS, we have spoken to the community I've spoken to the community at length, and there's a lot of environmental impacts of that tunnel. So that what we need to really look at is how can they, if this tunnel is coming and we're not going to be able to stop the tunnel, if it is coming down this pipe, what can we do to mitigate those impacts? So one of the big impacts is the drying up of the water, the 96% of the water through Burnt Bridge Creek deviation, some of the other water sources. That's just not going to be acceptable to the local community, and it will not support the continued habitat for the creatures and the biodiversity along those. And it's not just Burnt Bridge Creek, it's also through to Manly Dam and so forth. So we're working very hard to get those impacts mitigated. It's not going to be perfect, but the other thing is that I think it's 3,500 trees going to be wiped out. So one of the things council has been doing is talking about offsets. I think it might have been Pam talking about offsets earlier, but we've been negotiating with the state government about having any offsets returned in our local government area, because often what happens is the offsets happen elsewhere, and that's not going to help us. So it's not done and dusted yet, but the government is going full steam ahead. So I think we need to work with them to try to mitigate some of these impacts.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to move to Candy next. I'm just going to say, though, we have a number of really good questions. I am perfectly happy to keep going for an extra 3 or 4 minutes. If any candidates or guests need to go, we are going to put everybody's contact details on the screen, because we won't be able to get to everything, and we know lots of people want things answered, and I'll share on various links on Manly Observer as well. Candy.
Thanks. And first of all, I really do want to acknowledge Sarah. She's done a huge amount of work on this project and has really represented the community brilliantly. Look, I think it's time to change the conversation around this tunnel. It's just not needed. How can we justify $12 to $14 billion to save 5 or 6 minutes to get to the city? It's ridiculous. And it's time that we started to look at no other options were considered. Now that people are working from home more, the traffic situations are changing, and there's 250,000 people on the northern beaches. How can we possibly justify spending, $12 to $14 billion, ruining our environment? I'm sorry, it's just not on. And the more I look at it, the more concerned I am. And I agree with Sarah, we need to work with the government, but I think we need to start changing the conversation about what else can we do rather than have a tunnel.
Sam, you're next.
I'm very happy to hear that Candy has taken that stance. I'm ardently opposed to the tunnel, and was before Labor has recently come out against it. Having said that, Labor did run against it at the last state election. Yes, I agree with Councillor Gratton that it is hard to make government listen to you, but at the same time, council can make a stance. As an example, the Inner West Council negotiated protections and green spaces similar to what the work Councillor Gratton has been doing. They represented residents through the acquisitions processes. They also represented residents in relation to noise, dust and safety, again, similar to what council's been doing, which is great. But they took a strong stance against the tunnel. They went to the inquiry, submitted to the inquiry and testified at the inquiry against the tunnel. And what's also really important to do for a council is to communicate and educate the electorate to state what the issues are with the project. So everything that Candy's touched on, everything that Sarah Gratton has touched on in terms of Burnt Bridge Creek, 3,500 trees lost around Manly Dam catchment, which was a very important ecological community in our ward. And then also the harbour itself. There's toxic sludge sitting at the bottom of the harbour that has to be dredged up, and now it's peeing off the people in Newcastle because it's going to be sent there. The project, massive waste of money, environmentally damaging. There's no reason to support it. And according to traffic experts, it's also going to increase our travel time. Any time saved in the tunnel is more than accounted for by traffic waiting to get in and out of the tunnel. So yeah, definitely hate the project, and I'll do whatever I can to try and stop it.
I think I saw something like that on Utopia. It's a fantastic on ABC. Pam, over to you.
Totally agree with everything that's all been said already, but I don't think anybody's mentioned the filter stacks, or the unfiltered stacks, I should say, and the health implications for the school kids and, of course, the residents in the area where the stacks are. And I think there's got to be some thought as to what is the cost of health, and how can we really say, you know, it's going to affect the kids' health over the 6 years that the tunnel's going to be built, and then thereafter for generations to come. So I don't think that we should just accept the fact. I mean, yes, we can work around, you know, try and work with them, but how do you mitigate against air pollution, against, you know, our huge loss, and what do we actually get? Our community, what do we actually gain? Nothing. So totally against it. Yes.
Thanks, Pam. John, did you want to have a say in there?
Oh, yes, I suppose I will. I'll take a very pragmatic approach, and in that the tunnel will go ahead. What I'm particularly disappointed about is that there's really no public transport option in terms of, you know, making it just, you know, a bus lane only. I think that, again, we want to encourage people, if it's going to be there, to be able to not use cars, to use public transport, because that has a knock-on positive impact if people aren't in cars. But I agree with what everyone else is saying in terms of, and particularly I think Sarah put it quite eloquently, in terms of we've got to mitigate against all the issues that they're going to be in terms of the stacks, in terms of the impact on water flows in creeks and around Manly Dam catchment, in terms of the trees being cut down. And I think that it's like a lot of things in politics. There's a lot of horse trading that goes on. There's a lot of people wanting to look as if they've won, and, you know, and there's a lot of point scoring. I think underneath that, we've got to work diligently to ensure that the best possible outcome is there for the environment and the local residents. So, you know, I'd certainly be pushing the government more on public transport options. I mean, I'd love to see, you know, a light rail system on the northern beaches to take even more traffic and that off the road. But you know, that's not going to happen. But there should be at least a public transport corridor through that tunnel to encourage people to use it. But there has to be more buses provided at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's right, John. It is hard to get more transport and public transport in public-private partnerships. Doesn't always create the best financial case. So look, there's a lot more things that could be discussed about the environment, and there's a lot of questions on this Q&A. I think we were going to be putting some of those contact details up now or shortly. I think we are pretty much at wrap-up time, because we are 5 minutes over. I would like to say, though, if there's anybody who, because there are some questions here about EVs and electric vehicles, and also, you know, I've started riding my e-bike. It's amazing. I can actually get up hills now, and I think generally the local area is really embracing electric scooters and various things. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment or has any particular ambitions for securing the future of encouraging people to get out of their cars, or at least into electric ones?
Yeah, well, you know, I think things like, I mean, my wife's in Germany at the moment. She managed to get overseas, and she tells me every day that she's using the hire bikes to be able to travel from one place to the next. And obviously, when you're in London, the Boris bikes and that are extremely popular. I think we lack the cycleways or the safe cycleways, because I don't think that you can call Condamine Street cycling in the bus lane exactly a safe cycling lane, but that's what it's designated at. But I think that if we can encourage the e-bikes, if we can encourage cycleways, we can encourage bikes being able to be rented and so forth. It's safe. It's an easy form of transport. It's fairly cost effective. I mean, that would make a difference as well, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Look, none of our participants have dropped off, so if anyone wants to go, you've still got an audience.
Kim, I was just going to talk to the transport strategy that we passed a few years ago, which really is trying to promote active transport and setting up bike, and then we had the subsequent bike strategy where we're actually looking at those missing links across the northern beaches and how do we make those connections for people, not just there's cycling paths for recreational users, but for also people just to get to and from the shops and things. And electric bikes, how much fun is Canberra with those electric scooters? You can sort of go and you swipe your card, you get on a little scooter and whip around. It's flat, a little bit easier maybe to try to manage those. But we are balancing concerns from the community in relation to what happens with those higher scooters and where do they end up, and ending up in parks and in the so there's a balancing act there to try to work through, but certainly sort of for privately owned ones, and that's fantastic that you've got yourself an e-bike. Living up at Balgala Heights, certainly would like a little motor on my bike because it's a big hill to climb up.
Need it, a big one. Anyone else? Yes, Candy.
Yeah, thanks. Just quickly, recharging stations, not only for cars, but also for bikes. That's something that we should be looking at very seriously. The uptake of the electric bikes is, I live on the Eastern Hill and everybody's zooming up Darley Road while I'm struggling up there with my shopping. So I think that's really important that we look at that. But also one of the things that I'm fighting for is the electrification of the Manly ferries. And what's happening overseas now, I've seen a photograph recently of San Francisco ferry. There are so many bikes, electric bikes on board the ferry. And what people are doing now is that final mile. And I think somebody mentioned that in one of the questions. We need to start looking more seriously about providing those links so that people can make that final mile. And obviously having electric Manly ferries in the future is going to make a huge difference, a huge impact to our environment.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for, I know this was kind of in the middle of dinner time, at least it was for my family. But I think we got a lot out of, I think everybody very engaged. I'm not sure if everyone can, oh, there we go. That's everybody's contact details. Manly voters, it's in your power to keep our future free of fossil fuels, if that's your thing. Hopefully it is. Getting your EV or ride your bike down to the local school or community centre or wherever you're allowed to vote, 4th of December. You can actually do a postal vote right now. I know that that information is going to go up on the screen at some point. There we go. And you can actually pre-poll from the 22nd of November. And there is a story taking you through the pre-poll locations that are in Manly Ward and in Curl Ward. I think it's just one in our ward. It's at St Matt's on Darley Road. And there's a new ice cream place next door. So that's great. So from the 22nd November, you can pre-poll if you'd like to avoid other people. Personally, I missed people and I want to be somewhere near them. So you've got a lot of options. It is absolutely essential and in fact law that you vote. So make it count. There's no democracy sausage, but there are plenty of smashed avo meals to be had. So thanks everybody. This is the 4th event in the series. There's another one tomorrow night. Excellent host, me. And that will be for the Curl Ward, the other sexy part of the Northern Beaches. We'll be asking a lot of the same questions, but we'll have totally different candidates. And this will be available on around the place, but I'll also make it available on Manly Observer. So if you think that there's anything that is worth sharing with friends that was said tonight, some ideas or anything at all, share it, tag a friend. Let's get talking about some of the really important issues. So I think that'll, yes.
Kim, sorry, my email address is wrong. It's actually Britta and John, so it's T A.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Britta and John.
Please. And John at smartchat.net.au.
Yeah, BRITTAAND.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, my email address starts with an S for Sam, but I saw Jen picked it up.
My defence, I had nothing.
But you am for Labor.
And for Labor.
Well, yeah, you am for Labor. Love it. What a way to end. I love ending on a typo. That's pretty much informed for me. All right, look, thanks everybody. I think you're all worth voting for. Let's get you all into council. Why not? It's a large council area. We could have more councillors. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for the 30 people that we still have hanging around. Really appreciated your time tonight, and thank you for caring. Everybody can go and eat their food and see their family, have their nightcaps now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Well done.